These are 80-inch beds that we planted cover crop on that are going to go, this is actually going to go to melons and watermelons. And our goal is to be able to just mow this, strip till it, and then plant in the area where we strip till.
Okay.
And the cover crops in here, this is a Caliente mustard, so it's a mix of different mustards. And it's kind of hard to see, but we also put a couple lines of field peas, and the field peas are now being overgrown by the mustard. But we wanted a little bit of a nitrogen source with the field peas. And next to it is phacelia and mustard mix with the field peas planted in them. These were actually broadcast on the top of the beds with a Brillion drill. So the seed was more or less broadcast, and then we came back with a regular plate planter and planted our peas 2 lines in the middle. We have a little bit of a verticillium issue for some of our crops. So the melons and watermelons that we grow are not that resistant to verticillium. So Caliente mustard is supposed to, at its breakdown, is supposed to have some effect on the verticillium in the soil. So following this mustard crop, we're going to see if there's any benefit to the subsequent crops. They call it Caliente, and it has a number of different species and different mustards in it. So you can see the purple, the green. There's several in here, and it's something that a seed salesman gave to me to try. Said this is something that could help with the verticillium. We're also, we've switched it to grafted watermelons and melons on a rootstock that is resistant to verticillium, but it's quite expensive to get those plants produced. We had a little bit of experience last year doing this same sort of thing with the phacelia and mustard mix, and we were really pleased with how the melons did on top of them. So these 80-inch beds were formed prior to this season, but now that we put the cover crop on, the plan now is to see if we can go a couple crop cycles without primary tillage on the soil. And so after the melon crop is finished, we'll probably come back in and do another winter cover crop, and this could go to tomatoes next year. Okay. And then after that, we'll see another cover crop, and we may be going into lettuces in this field. If we do that, we may split the 80-inch beds into 240s, so it would be a modest amount of tillage just to put a furrow in between the 80-inch bed, but we would still not, not be using a spader or a disc for several seasons. And that's one of our kind of long-range goals, and reason that we're part of the SIG project is to see if there's amount of tillage that we've done historically with our chisel and disc and spaders, that usually every crop gets a primary tillage. If we can go 2 or 3 crop cycles at least before we do that again, then that will lead us to kind of our long-term goals of reducing our primary tillage by 50%. We're going to want to see what happens to the microbial life in the soil, and we're going to see what happens to the organic matter in the soil. This ranch, we were pretty fortunate when we started here in the late 1980s. We had about 2 to 3.5% organic matter. And then with the cover crop, we've done cover cropping over the years, and the composting, we're able to elevate the organic matter to between 3.5% and 6%. And we did that probably within a 10 or 12 year period. And but that was in the early 2000s. So for the last 15 years, we've basically been plateaued at that organic matter. We haven't lost it, but we haven't been able to improve it beyond that. So part of the goals for the reduced tillage is to see if that allows us to make a jump in organic matter. in our soils, which would also hopefully equate to more microbial life in the soil. By elevating organic matter and more microbial and a more diverse microbial life in the soil, then we would be able to make more nutrition available to the plants. We would be able to cut back on off-farm inputs. We do use a little bit of feather meal for nitrogen for some of our crops, so we have been able to cut back more and more on that, so we would have less inputs other than our cover cropping and composting. So that would be a big benefit, and then it would be interesting to see in the future if that does result in a higher nutrient density in the produce we're producing. And in doing this, we realize with any new technique that you're using, there's things to learn, and we don't want to see a big drop off in yield or production, but we know that we may have something in the first year or two, but certainly long term we want to see if this technique allows us to maintain the same level of production that we've had in the past. So we've been a modestly successful organic farm with our vegetable productions, with our current tillage practices, but we're going to see if these kind of reduced tillage practices allow us to maintain production that we're used to. This is our 4-acre compost site on our Santa Ana Ranch. We produce our own compost here. We've made as much as 2,500 tons a year, and in the last few years we've cut back to about 1,600 tons, and it's all for use on our own farm between our two ranches. And so this compost was started into last summer, and it's finished. This is feedstocks, our cull vegetables. There could be dairy manure, horse manure. There's a local duck farm, we can get duck manure. If we can get inexpensive wheat straw or wheat hay, that's a feedstock of our compost. If we're making compost in the summer, it takes about 18 weeks to get to finished compost, and this is a managed turned aerobic compost. And this in the background, that's the compost turner we use to turn it. These windrows here are about 200 tons. It takes about 20 minutes to turn a windrow when we're turning it.
Okay, good. How do you water these?
We have an underground pipeline, and you can see kind of a hose laid out over here, so we have a drag hose that attaches to the turner.
And so you are spraying.
We are spraying water as we're opening up the windrows with the turner. Oh. We've also had some interest in getting some compost or vermicompost treatment on our seeds we're planting. And so I'm going to take something that we're kind of used to doing. With our compost, we have a compost tea maker that makes highly aerobic compost tea. And we're going to try some different, our own compost, which I think is pretty decent. And we're also going to try some vermicompost. We're going to brew a 24-hour tea, and then we're going to apply that to our seeds, dry the seeds off, and plant that to see what kind of effect that has on the seeds. So this is still in the learning process. I haven't actually done any yet, but I have an idea, and it's what we're going to start doing. I have been experimenting with our seed treatment with some humate materials, but now with the interest in maybe trying some more biology on the seed coat, we're going to look at some of the compost, compost tea, vermicompost, and our compost mixes on the seed. So this was the cover crop that was mown. And now we're going to run our vertical tillage tool, the chopping disc in line that will come through and start to chop this up and press it into the soil. And then we will come with the strip tiller and run a strip down the middle. This is a little bit of a surprise to me. These are the stalks of the safflower. I didn't realize they would get quite this big. So We'll see how the vertical tillage tool does chopping. If we have to run a second time, maybe we can start to get it chopped up. Run our strip tiller, and for peppers we need to put buried drip tape in because that's the way we've normally done it. So we do in that strip tilled area we'll have to come in and put our buried drip tape in. Then we might want to, since peppers are a pretty big nitrogen user, we may want to put a small amount of feather meal in, because this will be our chance. We'll also spread compost here before we run the strip tiller. And then we'll want to kind of seal up that strip tilled area where the drip tape is. And then hopefully it'll be in shape to plant peppers here in less than a month. So the transplants, at least in some of these higher residue fields with the tillage, minimal tillage we're doing, it may not quite be a seed bed for direct seed, but with a transplant, it may work a lot easier. We have this field planted to double line safflower for a cover crop, and this came out of winter vegetables. We had parsnips, celery root, rutabagas, fennel. And then we just lightly tilled the tops of the beds with a rotera, and we planted the double lines. And the next crop in here is sweet corn in the next month or so. So we will come in and mow, and we'll plant the sweet corn between the lines of safflower. And I'm thinking when we mow the safflower, it's probably going to kill it. So we probably don't have to do a lot of tillage other than maybe work up a little bit of seed bed, probably use the strip tiller more than likely, and run a line between the two lines of safflower, and that is where we'll plant the sweet corn. It's mixed species. Most of them are native shrubs, and they're shrubs that will bloom at different times of the year. And this has been a key component for our building and maintaining a native beneficial insect population. And so the idea is you have different bloom throughout the year, so there's habitat for the beneficial species to survive. This hedgerow, we actually did some modification to it. We came in and took out some of the older species that were starting to fail. This hedgerow was put in 1998, so some of the species were getting old. And then we had a couple species that were dominant that we didn't want in the hedgerow anymore, so we came in and selectively removed. And so this is one of the species we left, and we're just now coming in and replanting and rebuilding the hedgerow, and these were just planted last week. Some of these species were planted last fall, so in the next season or two, this hedgerow will be reestablished. Well, we believe that it's a habitat for beneficial insects. So the strategy would be to have build up our native population at a low level, so that when pest problems, aphid, thrip, start to build up out in the field, they're on the farm to move into the field to help control those pests. And in conjunction with that, in field we're using insectary plantings, which would be alyssum, dahlia, coriander, and cilantro, maybe white dill, so that those are flowering plants are drawing the beneficials right close to the cash crop where the potential pest problems might occur. The other thing we've noticed with the hedgerows over the years is it's habitat for native pollinators, and even if we bring bees onto the farm, you see the bees benefiting from the flowers on the hedgerow. They add a little bit of beauty and interest to the farm, and in some cases, once they're established, they are a little bit of a windbreak to help slow some wind speeds down.